two lifelong best friends discuss the movies that they love. I'm one of your hosts, Shuggy, an amateur film reviewer.
And I am Nye Reese, an actor.
just an actor. That's all we've got.
Actor and film lover.
Yes, absolutely. And it's your pick this week for the film, so why don't you go and introduce us?
It was, yeah. So I've picked the full Monty, 97 film, which I was 3 when it came out. Definitely too young to be watching it, but living in the liberal household that I did, I was exposed to that sort of entertainment. I'm going to start that again because that sounds like I was exposed to male stripping. No, we'll keep that in, I think. Yeah, so it was a favourite of mine growing up. I mean, I'm sure we'll get onto it, but music-wise, brilliant. Actors, great. Storyline, feel good, yeah.
Yeah, it was a film I saw when I was younger, like maybe 6 or 7, and I haven't seen since. So this was not quite a completely new experience for me, but close to. Having remembered very little about it. I was surprised at just how much I enjoyed it. Yeah, I thought it was. I was really surprised that actually, given that this was the 90s, that in many ways it was a far more progressive film than most films you'll see in that era, and even into the 2000s. So that was good, and I'm really glad you picked this one because I'm not sure it's something I'd have chosen to revisit on my own for much, unless I had a reason to.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's interesting what you say about it being progressive. I think it still feels, in a way, kind of eerily relevant. Obviously, it's set in Sheffield. All the kind of the steelworks industry has been dismantled methodically, and somehow that seems to feel still kind of poignant today. And rewatching it the other night really sort of kind of highlighted that for me, which obviously wasn't something that I got from it when I was younger. But yeah, you kind of say it's progressive in that sense, but considering it was sort of based, or sort of it was done in the 90s. I also forgot. I've seen it a couple of times since I watched it when I was younger. But there were so many little. What was great about it is there's so many little scenes that I've completely forgotten. And I'm just going to go in straight in and just kind of talk about when they're in the queue, waiting to get their benefits money, and the music's playing, and they just all kind of start just doing little dance moves along without even realising. And it's just kind of for me that was just a bit of simple, funny but brilliant film. I just thought it was absolutely brilliant, and I think that feel good humour, although addressing some actually very politically serious issues, ran throughout the film, and I think that's something that kind of has kept it engaging for me at the age of 5 and at the age of 18 and now at the age of 25.
Yeah, that scene you mentioned actually is one of the few things I do remember because I feel it's one of the most iconic moments from the film. It famously was actually nearly cut, and I'm so glad they left it in because it has gone on to that's the bit that people remember is them standing in the queue and all doing the little moves. But it's really interesting to talk about the humour and the balance of that with kind of this heavier political stuff, and the fact that they managed to find humour in almost anything. When when it's up at the top of the film, and what's the guy's name?
Gaz.
No, not Gaz. The first one that they sort of get on board, this ex-security guard.
Oh, Lomper.
No, Lomper. When he's trying to kill himself. And that's...
and we're not laughing at the killing himself, by the way.
But they turn that into what is a hilarious scene. But it's also a powerful scene. Like it works on
Yeah.
both those levels.
Mm. Yeah. I mean, you see the kind of moment where Dave, there's that kind of contrast between Dave being the lump and the airhead that he is, when he fixes the car for him because so for those of you who haven't seen the film, Lumpa he's trying to kill himself by gassing himself in his car, but it's broken, and so Dave, one of the main characters, fixes his car for him, and then walks off and leaves him to it, and then realizes what happens, and there's just that moment, and he runs back, and that kind of immediate switch between the humor of him just kind of being that oaf that clearly doesn't get what's going on, and then that sort of sudden shock wave of like humanity in him,
Yeah.
and the fact that and that kind of urgency and that panic, and he pulls him out, and then he calls him a bastard or something, and then just chucks him straight back in the car, and it's just kind of like what happens so brilliantly in this film is that it just toys with humor constantly. It's almost like having like a funny sandwich throughout. It's like it's rooted in the seriousness of it, but it's just kind of sugar coated with humor, and you kind of and so it's almost like kind of two compliments and a constructive criticism in terms of the way that it's constructed.
Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it. I love the way it balances, you know, the themes that it tackles, you know, of kind of the loss of this male identity from like the 80s, with the destruction of the steel industry in Sheffield. You know, the complete collapse of that, and the fact that it has now led to these people kind of a bit bereft and unsure of what to do, and that leading on to themes of, you know, body issues, you know, body dysmorphia with Dave. You've got the father and son relationship with Gaz. You've got LGBT themes in there with Lomper and Guy. It's got so much in there. Even with like Gerald, his reluctance to tell his wife because he feels less of a man about it because he's lost his job. It tackles all these themes, and they are big, important themes. But it does it all with such a deftness and with this great comedic touch that you don't feel like you're being lectured by the film because you're just having such a great time.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you kind of touch on the point of masculinity, because and the way that kind of, I mean, you've got Nathan, who is Gaz's son, who is sort of being he's witnessing all of this as a kid that's kind of growing and very influenced and easily influenced and learning a lot about the world around him, and you see the way that it kind of that journey is almost reflected in him as well. He starts off being quite sort of, he's quite quiet. He's fairly reserved, and seeing the way that these kind of not necessarily masculine traits, but these lack of kind of what is considered typical masculinity, the way that these men embrace that brings out a more confident side in Nathan as well, which you see kind of develop throughout the film.
Yeah, that's something I hadn't even thought about until right now, actually. You know, at the start where he's, you know, running away from spending time with his dad, you know, they have the heart-to-heart. But, you know, at the end, he's the one who's saying, no, you need to get out there. You need to go and do this when Gaz doesn't want to perform.
Yeah.
That's a really good point.
Yeah, and it's just, I think it just kind of really brilliantly illustrates how sort of what is considered masculinity is sort of passed down from one generation to the next, and actually what Nathan ends up learning is that embracing the masculine traits that you do or don't have is what is going to kind of give you the confidence that you need to survive in a world where it is tough. I mean, there's unemployment, and and there is kind of men are subjected to all sorts of standards, and yeah, so I think that's another thing that this film addresses really nicely.
Yeah. I don't know about you. I thought for me, Dave is the character that really moved me, and that's because I'm a bigger guy. Definitely have some body confidence issues, and I loved his story in it. And that kind of ending that last moment with his wife, where she's not assuming it. She's assuming this guy can go out and get other girls, and he's like, no, I was out there dancing, but who wants to see me? And she's like, I do, because she at no point even thinks about this. She's there just like, I love you for you. I don't care what you look like. And it takes him the whole film to kind of accept that. He's so reluctant to ever take part.
I think you're right. Actually, for me, that's also kind of the storyline that struck me the most. I think there's various reasons for that. I mean, body dysmorphia and kind of body confidence issues, they transcend size and weight. They are pretty global. You don't have to be overweight to have them, and so that's something that kind of almost speaks universally to, I would, from my experience, most men, and so I think that's relatable on a very kind of wide scale. Also, there is no denying that Mark Addy is a fantastic actor.
He's great.
And he does such a good job with it. And it's a brilliantly written part. It's the way that it's constructed, the way that it's portrayed in the film is brilliant. It's sensitively approached, but also done with kind of this blunt humour. I mean, the moment where he's sitting in his shed and he wraps the cling film around his stomach and sits there eating a chocolate bar. And it's kind of the humour of it, but also the fact that you can see how sad he is, and how little control he has over it, and how much it has hit his confidence. Whereas you kind of look at Gaz, and not everybody struggles with what it means to be a dad, or you look at Gerald, and not everybody struggles with what it means to be out of work and having to maintain a marriage and with certain expectations, or so I think that for me, the reason behind that being so kind of powerful is because it is relatable on so many levels for so many people.
Yeah, I agree with you on the kind of the Gaz and the Gerald thing. Obviously, I feel quite like I had a pretty good relationship with my dad growing up, so I've never had I can't relate to it from Nathan's perspective. Obviously, I don't have kids, so I can't come at it from Gaz's perspective. I still think it's a really lovely story. I love that relationship in it. We talked earlier about kind of how it's not just Gaz growing, it's Nathan. But yeah, it doesn't hit me on the same kind of personal level that Dave's story does.
Yeah,
I completely agree.
Yeah, I think there's also the other thing that we see with Dave is that we see a lot more of his personal struggle. So obviously Gaz has his struggle with Nathan, but you don't see too much of. I mean, you see bits of Gerald. You see kind of things being repossessed and stuff. But at that time, it's put into the context of his relationship with the guys. The whole kind of put down and piss off line, which is iconic. And like Guy, you don't really learn much about Guy. Horse, you don't really learn too much. I mean, the most you see about him is when he invites his family to come and see them rehearse, which I think is hilarious. But you don't see those personal issues as much as you do with Dave. And even Gaz, I mean, Gaz, who is kind of considered the lead character in the film, you don't see the personal issues that you do in the same way with Dave. And everybody, for example, is really focused on sort of building this dance group and getting themselves ready for this gig. Meanwhile, Dave is off trying to make some money, doing something completely separate. He's worried about his relationship. You see his relationship with his wife, and how Gene gets he's worried about him and his kind of interaction with her. So I think the way that's explored throughout the film kind of humanizes him a bit more as well.
Yeah, I can see that. So, I mean, the film kind of touched on Dave quite a lot there. As I say, for all the performances, the one that really surprised me was Tom Wilkinson as Gerald. I know Tom Wilkinson quite well from, heavy dramas. He played a lot of sort of classic American politicians in things like Selma, and a lot of crime films, like Rock and Roller, or he's in Batman Begins as the mob boss. I don't think I've ever seen him do a comedic performance before. And I was so pleasantly surprised by his comedic ability.
Yeah. I mean, it ranges from kind of the way that he's concerned in his, like, the way that he's talking about his wife wanting to go skiing, or having bought a sunbed, to his physical comedy. I mean, going back to that scene where they're all dancing in the queue and he just kind of busts out a move as he walks off, and it's, yeah, I think it gives, he's got a lot of scope, especially as he's written as the kind of most conservative of the lot. I think that gives him more scope to play with the sort of nuances of the comedy underneath the character. And yeah, he just kind of adds this whole different dimension, and like the gnomes is just as a running theme throughout his character's story. It's just a great little addition.
And I love the ending when his wife smashes the gnome, and he's like, "I thought you liked them," and she's like, "No."
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it just kind of shows how like out of touch he is with everything in the first place. Yeah, no, that's a great. I think just bringing that out to kind of a broader perspective, I think the character arcs and the characters that are developed across all of the characters, especially, I mean, we're talking about the main characters in the part of the dance group. I think they're called Hot Metal. So yeah, I think they're all done not only very well, but they're all kind of done to the right extent on an individual basis, because you don't find out so much about Guy. I mean, you find out that he is gay or bisexual, or kind of he's bi-curious or whatever, but you don't necessarily you don't delve into his personal life in the way that you do with Gerald or with Dave. I mean, Lomper to some extent you do, obviously, because he's introduced as a character who has issues. So I think it wouldn't be right to not explore that as part of his character. But even that is only done to a certain extent, and it kind of sets up the group really well. It kind of sets not so much a hierarchy amongst them, but kind of it rather than throwing so much information at you that you're kind of bombarded and trying to figure out who's doing what and who is who and where everyone stands, that's kind of given to you on a plate.
Yeah, I mean, it was something the director really talked about, was making sure that they were all distinct and unique, their own characters. Because I imagine, this goes over to play in America, and it's, this sick working class Sheffield guys. I mean, they didn't understand a lot of the kind of, the dialect and the accent. They didn't even understand what the full Monty was. So they have to make these characters, really pop to stand out for an audience who, won't see the kind of micro differences. They have to make them all be very definitively their own character.
Yeah. And I think they achieved that very well. to
Yeah.
put it bluntly. And that's kind of what makes the film so engaging when it's all tied into the other elements of the production, so like the music and like the cinematography. What I didn't realise was I was looking it up as I watched it, and I think it's something like 98 on Rotten Tomatoes. It's got 98% or something crazy
Wow.
like that. So it's very. I mean, it's clearly done its job as a film, and I do love that it's kind of one of those films that you don't hear much about, but I think pretty much everybody that I've spoken to that has watched it thinks it's a fantastic film.
I feel like it's a film that received so much like love at the time, and that kind of its legacy, people going back and revisiting it, hasn't necessarily happened over the last 20 years. But when people do, they still love it because it is a joyous experience. Like, there are so many great gags. Like, I think my favourite moment was when they're doing the rehearsals and Guy says, I can do the singing in the rain bit. Where he run up the wall.
Yeah.
He just runs into the wall. And you cut to him just out on the floor.
Yeah, oh yeah, the audition sequence. Yeah, and I think that was I mean, in terms of editing and in terms of sort of the cinematography side of it, that was the right choice, because obviously then you later on see it when they're waiting for Gaz to show up for the rehearsal where their horse's family come to watch. And there's no warning or anything. He just runs at the wall, gives it a go, and just lands straight on his back. As if, not only as if he'd been practicing and something had changed, but also as if that situation needed that in that moment. It's those little pops of just random comedy, which are it's such a feel-good film. It has all of these, and I know I've already said it so many times. It has all of these kind of really sort of important topics that it addresses, and these like undertones and conversations that it sort of hints at. But you still come away from it going, this film is so feel good. You come away feeling really sort of just uplifted by the whole thing, and I think the kind of overriding message of the whole thing is very positive, and the way that it finishes is all very positive, and it's kind of tries and tugs at the heartstrings in a very light-hearted way. But yeah, despite all of these sort of more all of these more sort of substantial messages underneath it, the comedy just brings it to life and gives it that sort of really feel good factor. I don't know other way I can describe it, really.
Yeah. I mean, as you say, this is a film where we can, look at serious issues about, someone's life collapsing or them feeling so uncomfortable in their own skin that they aren't able to, have sex with their wife anymore. And at the same time, this is a film where they discuss the quality of the welding in Flashdance, which was another one of those just bits that just absolutely killed me watching it.
I could just go on and on about all these little moments, because the film is littered with them, and it's amazing. It's amazing how, although we could talk forever about the impact of unemployment on their lives, or their lack of self-confidence, and we could go on about that, but it's almost like these kind of little moments that are thrown in all every single scene, every other second there's a joke or there's something that happens that just makes you kind of perk up a little bit. That's what gives the film its identity, and it just kind of it changes what that film is completely. And I think that's what kind of sets it apart from other films, is that it's got this almost kind of crossover in genre, which I think has ultimately just given it this really long lifespan.
You could easily make a very heavy drama about the same topic. And, there are people out there who do make heavy dramas about, British working class life. But I'm so glad we got this kind of just one of the most feel-good films I think I've seen in quite a long time.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
which is good. Like,
Yeah,
I needed a feel-good film, so I'm really glad you picked it.
Well, you're very welcome. I think that's kind of what, like, there is no doubt that humour is what at some point made our parents think it was acceptable for their kids to watch it. Because, and like, yeah, at the time I didn't necessarily pick up on the fact that Dave didn't want to sleep with his wife anymore, or any of that stuff. And I certainly didn't understand the whole kind of the context of unemployment, and I didn't know the political context behind the film. But what it is that makes it watchable for a child or for a younger person, a younger audience, is the humour, and it's things like the gnomes when Gerald's at his interview and you're seeing the gnomes pop up in the window behind the interviewer, and it's those little moments, but they work for all ages, and that's what makes it such an accessible film, and also such a long-lasting film.
And I think the other thing that touches in for pretty much anyone is the soundtrack.
Oh yeah,
that is classic pop banger after classic pop banger.
It is. I mean, it was one of those soundtracks where every time a song came on, I bopped along. Like when I watched it the other night, I bopped along. But I always had that song, like those songs. I knew they existed. They were always kind of in the back of my head, but I'd always kind of forgotten that I'd seen them in this film.
Yeah.
So they'd pop up and I'd be like, oh my God, yes, this song is here. I remember now. And then of course it's accompanied by the dancing, and it's given when I think what's brilliant is when you have such a great soundtrack that is directly interacted with visually. So I mean, you can have a brilliant score or a brilliant soundtrack over a film, and it's used exactly as that, a score. But I think the way that they use it to interact directly with the dancing and the kind of the rehearsals and things like that, it just adds a whole nother level to the music. That moment when they're in the steel yard and Gaz is rehearsing in front of the car, they've got the car lights on, and they're going through the records, and they kind of set it up. They set up that moment where they stick on the banger and the music comes on. And he takes off his jacket and the coins go flying everywhere, which I think is just such. I think is just so. I mean, I remember when my dad used to walk around with coins and coins in his pockets, and it's just such. It's just such a dad thing to do, and it's so kind of. It's just those little moments, and again, like they're just everywhere. But using that, they use that scene beforehand to build up the soundtrack, and then it comes in, and you're like. And it is almost like a finale.
Yeah, I mean, even past so we talk about those ones that are hugely important. You sexy thing, hot stuff. You can leave your hat on. Like play these big roles where they are interacting with it and dancing along with it. Like taking a look at the rest of the soundtrack, you've got "Light My Fire" by The Doors. You've got "Bohemian Rhapsody" by Queen, "Highway Star" by Deep Purple, "We Have Family" by Sister Sledge. Like it's a list of really, really famous and classic 70s and 80s songs.
Yeah.
It's just even the ones that are in the background. I don't even know if some of those are really, heavily featured in the film or just on the soundtrack.
Yeah.
But they're just so many classics.
I think ultimately it's just a comment on how those songs, really just kind of reached people across a huge demographic. I mean, it was they kind of. I mean, we're looking at a group of people that live in Sheffield in the 90s that have lost their careers in the steel industry, and they are using this music and using these songs to not only get a bit of money but also to kind of uplift them and keep them going. And I think so. Not only is it used to serve the story, but it's also used to celebrate the music in itself.
Yeah, absolutely. You look like you're thinking here, Nye.
I don't feel like I can analyze this film too much because I just love it. Like there's such a I feel like it doesn't pretend to be something it's not. There's not loads of subtext to it. I think the comment on masculinity is a really important thing to pick up on, and it is kind of driving the film as it goes. But I think, like I said, the film's identity is formed by the comedy moments, the bits that kind of just take you by surprise, like when Lompa's rehearsing with the band and they suddenly start do do do, and he just knows exactly what's happening. He puts down his trumpet and he just sits there and he's laughing, and it's kind of like
he loves it.
That hit me right in the feels. Because for a start, that's like one of the first times you see him kind of go, all right, this is funny, I'm happy, I'm like, you see him feel slightly settled and comfortable in himself.
He talked earlier about not having any friends at all, and then at this point, he's getting on with the band he plays in. He's relaxed.
Yeah,
he's having a great time. I actually enjoy all of those kind of them finding out they've got some notoriety.
Yeah,
like they all fit so well. Like I love Gerald just buying all the papers in the shop and binning them and running off.
Yeah, I think
so good.
And it's that really for me is what this film is. It's just it makes the comment, it states what it's about. It doesn't pretend to be anything else, and then it just kind of rolls with it and it fleshes it out with a whole bunch of humour. And it just keeps it all lighthearted all the way through. Because I think from the get-go, because it sets the scene with the whole sort of the montage of building Sheffield up, the whole promotional advert of Sheffield at the beginning, and then cuts to, I think it's like 13 years later or something. I think that almost kind of goes, right, well, that's what this is about. And then from the get-go, you don't have to read into that side of it too much. And it is simply just a film to enjoy, I think. However kind of important those issues are, they make it a film to just sort of sit back and enjoy as much as you can.
Yeah, and one of the things that I really enjoy, and always do when this guy's in a film or TV show, is Robert Carlyle's performance.
Oh yeah, he's brilliant, isn't he?
I mean, I've watched, 3 or 4 seasons of Once Upon a Time, which is not the world's greatest show, but just because Robert Carlyle's so good in that. And, this is, I believe, he was Oscar nominated for this, I believe. No, he wasn't Oscar nominated, sorry, he was BAFTA nominated.
Right.
But, this is up there, amongst his best performances, because he is so good, despite the fact that he thought during production that the film was terrible. He's gone on record saying he thought it was terrible, but he still gives this brilliant performance, touching performance. I mean, the scene he has when he catches up with Nathan after Nathan runs away from the rehearsal.
Yeah.
The scene he has with Gerald when Gerald's sort of breaking down with him. Every one of like the really big emotional scenes, I think Robert Carlyle was there. He's not always the one being the big actor, but he is always part of those scenes because he is just such a phenomenal performer. Yeah,
I think what he gets to do in this film is he gets to show how much range he has. I think another film that I love personally that I saw him in, and funnily enough as a father figure, is 28 Weeks Later. and he doesn't. I mean, his story is without spoiling it. Probably going to spoil it now. His story as a human father doesn't last too long, so you don't get to see that range. But the range that he has in this film, that kind of scope that he's given to play with in this film is huge. And from that moment where he's dancing in front of the car, and he's using that moment to, like, his whole point is that he's trying to raise money so that he can pay his share so that he can look after Nathan, and having that kind of underpin the whole thing, when you're watching him dance in front of the car, or when you're watching him trying to steal steel rod at the beginning, or
Yeah, that's...
but then there's the moments where like Mandy tells him that he can't see Nathan anymore outside the school, and he will just wants to take him to the park or to play football or whatever, and he's given the freedom that he as an actor will just relish, and I think that is, I mean, it's brilliantly cast. There's no doubt about that, but I think that is what makes his character just so poignant throughout the whole thing, is that his narrative has those kind of extremes written into it.
Yeah, and obviously he's just the perfect man for it. Yeah, I guess the last thing I kind of really want to touch on myself is, for 1997 to, we don't get like an explicit them kissing, but it does have an LGBT relationship in there, with Lomper and Guy,
yeah.
which I think pretty groundbreaking for the time. I was actually slightly worried, 10 minutes into the film, because Gaz is throwing around some, slightly homophobic language at a couple of points. And I was a bit worried, like, oh, is this going to be very dated on, LGBT stuff? And then we actually get, a gay relationship, which, for me, like, the fact that they showcase that was so unexpected and so welcome.
Yeah, I think there's a real, just before going on to that, just referring back to what you were saying about Gaz, I think that there's a real art in creating a film that has content that is homophobic, and that is, I mean, he's very sexist. His character is very sexist in the film as well, or presents as sexist, at least. And there is a real art in creating that as I know I keep using the phrase, but as a comment rather than as content.
Yeah, rather than projecting that as like the filmmaker's views.
Yeah, so you watch it back now, and even though social and political views may have very differently in 97, you still look at it now in 2020, and you think, actually, this isn't just how it was, or this isn't because it was accepted in films. This is still a political and social comment on the socio-economic circumstances he finds himself in, the upbringing he's had, where, like, his surroundings, and I think that, and the way that is balanced with the kind of brief but exploration into LGBTQ relationships, I think just emphasizes how aware this film is. The writing in this film seems very politically aware. It's so aware, in fact, that you can go back and 25 years later and see it as analysis rather than just kind of doing it because it gets away with it in that time period, in that era, just going back to how they explore the kind of the gay relationship between Lomper and Guy. I think it's kind of really interesting how it kind of addresses not only what masculinity is, for those two characters and what that means. But also you see how when Gaz and Dave kind of make the comment towards the end, and however brief that may be, it reflects how their perspective of themselves changes in relation to something that they initially seem to have a prejudice against. And yeah, I think that's kind of that almost sort of draws a whole line under the movie. And yeah, I think in '97, I mean, I can't remember too many films from '97, if I'm perfectly honest. But I can't remember seeing many films that kind of explored sexuality in that way, especially in the context of what it means in relation to masculinity.
Yeah.
And put in the context of two men in jockstraps who have been stripping off in what is not portrayed to be a gay context, gay in inverted commas there. So yeah, I think the kind of exploration into sexuality in that context is really powerful.
100%, very, very powerful.
It's not done in a way where it serves any sort of stereotype.
And I mean, there's a criticism in a lot of art, you know, when we showcase art, you know, around, you know, people of colour or around LGBT people. A lot of it is showing their struggle, which is important. You know, it is important to show that, but it is also important to have art which showcases, you know, these people just is, you know, the everyman as well, so that it gets more and more normalised. And it's so refreshing to see a film, you know, which just shows this LGBT relationship as just the most normal thing in the world. It happens, you know, if you replace those with two, you know, a male character and a female character, no one would blink an eye, because it's not, you know, it's not being shown as anything, you know, extraordinary. It's just being shown as this is a natural relationship developing. And again, I think that is such an important thing to see, particularly in the 90s.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think that you made a really good point, that it's there in a kind of an effort to normalise and almost celebrate it. I mean, in the way that it kind of comes about, and the fact that the film is a celebration of masculinity, or the kind of breakdown of that in itself, I think kind of contributes to the celebration of sexuality and what it means to be attractive or be attracted to. And I think, yeah, no, that's a very good point, that it's used just to normalise it. And I think even just kind of having that moment and then not really touching on it again, because it doesn't need to be touched on again. You know, I think it's almost like using the silence to kind of say a lot, which I think is very well done and very well considered there.
Okay, before we kind of get into final thoughts, shall I just quickly do a little bit of post-production on the film?
Yes.
So it was released at the end of August, and it was 2 days before the death of Princess Diana. And that's important because a lot of people believe that kind of contributed to the success of the film, because we've talked so much about what a feel-good film it was. And that was it was a big event in the history of this country, and a lot of people did want something feel-good after that, and people think that might be one of the big reasons why it was such a huge success. I mean, off like a $3.5 million budget, it made over $250 million at the box office, which is just an unbelievable return. Like, the only films you see making returns like that these days are horror films, which you make for like tiny budgets, and they make so much more. And then it did really well at the awards. At the BAFTAs, it did fantastically. It beat Titanic for Best Picture, and Robert Carlyle won Best Actor. At the Oscars, again, it got...
Is it bad if I say I'm not surprised?
At the Oscars, it got nominations as well, and for this tiny British film to be again up there doing, up there with the big Oscar Hollywood blockbusters. It was nominated for Best Picture, Best Director, Best Screenplay, and the slightly controversial one was Best Score, because people thought that the soundtrack is so much more pivotal, and there's debate on that kind of online, but it had a lasting effect early on in its life. In '99, it was ranked 25th on the BFI's top 100 British films list. But again, to kind of show the not so much of a longevity of the film for people who don't go back and revisit, it wasn't on like later versions of the list, but it has subsequently spawned several other adaptations. In 2000, it became a Broadway musical, which was like an Americanized version of it. Mm-hmm. Obviously, you probably know more about that than I do.
I know a bit, not too much. I'm more of a fan of the film.
Yeah,
if I'm totally honest. Yeah.
But then in 2013, the original writer Simon Beaufoy, he adapted it into a stage play. It had a UK tour, and then it came to London, but it closed after just a month of the 3.5-month run. So I'm not sure how successful it was. There was also a big lawsuit around it by 2 New Zealand playwrights who claimed it was very similar to their play Ladies' Night, but that was something settled out of court. One of the interesting things about kind of going into the film is it was really hard for them to get any funding at all, with Miramax and Film 4 both turning them down. Miramax turned them down because it was apparently very similar to another film called Brassed Off. Have you ever heard of Brassed Off, Nye?
I haven't.
No.
So I bet they're kicking themselves.
Yeah, no, that is not the successful one. Well, I mean, there are other reasons that people at Miramax might be kicking themselves, but not talking about that. No, Brassed Off is a 96 film with a kind of... It's a similar plot about people turning to... So, in Full Monty's case, it's stripping. In Brassed Off, it's about turning to a brass band. And it also weirdly stars someone who was in Trainspotting. It stars Ewan McGregor.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, that was not the success that the Full Monty went on to be. So,
do you know what? Now you mention that, I think I might have seen it.
Well, you're doing better than I have. I have never. I
think
heard
I might have seen it. I have a memory of seeing Ewan McGregor in a film about being in a brass band.
Well, that's Brassed Off, which.
But I don't remember it as well as Full Monty, so that says a lot.
No, well, I don't think anyone does. Certainly didn't get the box office or awards recognition that the Full Monty did.
Yeah.
So, you got any final thoughts on the film other than you love it?
Not really. No, I love it. The music's brilliant. It's such a well-rounded film, and regardless of the kind of the context behind it, and obviously it being set in the 90s in Sheffield and not necessarily the happiest of circumstances, you will not stop feeling great throughout it.
Yeah, as I say, I went into this, I was expecting, I knew it was like a comedy drama, but I was expecting the drama to feel a lot heavier, and with kind of everything that's going on in the world, I didn't necessarily want a very heavy film. I was worried, it's a guy lost his job, struggling for money, struggling with his relationship with his child and ex-wife, and I was like, is this going to be heavy with some comedic moments? And the whole time I was beaming smile, because it was a joyous experience watching. It was so funny. Again, I didn't remember any of the jokes or comedy moments outside of that Q scene. So yeah, 100% would recommend if you haven't seen it.
Yes, do go and watch. Okay, so on that note, I think it is your turn to choose next episode's film, so take it away.
It is, and for those who don't know, I was a classicist at university. Mm-hmm. And
I think I can see where this is going.
Do you?
I don't know. Have I spoken to you?
Are you thinking it's Gladiator?
Yeah. Am I wrong?
Okay. So that was in my head, but what I'm actually going to be picking is one of the films that kind of made me fall in love with mythology. It's Ray Harryhausen's Jason and the Argonauts.
Okay, so like old school.
Yeah, stop motion.
Yeah, yeah.
I love
Okay,
it.
okay, cool. Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing that. I haven't seen it for a long time actually, so yeah.
Nor have I, to be honest. I think I caught bits on TV maybe a year or two ago, but yeah, I haven't seen it properly
Yeah.
in years.
Yeah, I have this really like vivid image of Jason fighting the skeletons on the cliff.
Yeah, it's iconic.
Yeah, yeah, and
I'll be honest, I might have been thinking I'll pick Gladiator,
oh,
and then you were like,
oh,
I
come
know, and I
on.
changed at the last minute just to spite
Of
you.
course you did. Really?
Maybe, maybe.
Okay.
It's possible.
Yeah. All right. Well, this is the kind of friendship that we have, guys.
Yeah, yeah.
um, yeah. No, I'm looking forward to that. I think it'll be really cool. Okay. Should we finish?
Yep. Okay, so you can find the podcast on iTunes, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Podbean, and our YouTube channel. You can follow us at Nostalgia Bubble on Twitter or at Nostalgia Bubble Podcast on Facebook and Instagram. You can follow me at Shuggy Says, that's SHUGGIE, on all social media platforms. And Night?
You can follow me on Twitter at Nyrees, so NYEREES, and on Instagram at ReeseNye, so REESNYE. And I think we are also trying to sort out the podcast on Spotify as well.
Hopefully we'll get Spotify working soon. I don't know if it is at the moment, but we'll see.
Yeah. Okay, and until next time, see you soon. Bye.
Goodbye.